This is a special meeting of the City Council, Wednesday, November 20th, 2024. And on our agenda this evening is a workshop regarding Artist Live Workspace along Laguna Canyon Road. And just to let everybody know, we have a hard stop today at 5:45. The Planning Commission has a meeting and we have to be out of here. So we're going to get first a presentation from Jennifer.
Mayor, can I really quickly report out from that closed session?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor. The City Council recessed into closed session pursuant to the real property negotiations that's listed on the agenda, the first part of the agenda at 4:15. All council members were present. No reportable action was taken. The city continues to negotiate on the properties.
Thanks, Megan. Okay. Are you going to start? Okay. So we'll get a presentation. How many people want to comment on this item tonight? Okay, we'll take limited time for comments and then we'll come back to council.
They don't do a roll call, huh?
I've got the link.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Oh, it's Granicus. Sorry. Okay. Thank you, Mayor. Sorry about that delay. Almost there. Yep, it's thinking. Uh-huh. Okay. Good evening, Mayor, City Council. Jeremy Fremont, Assistant City Manager. This evening, I have myself, Gavin, other Assistant City Manager, and Jennifer, our Housing Coordinator, to really walk through the Affordable Artist Live Work Housing Initiative. Why we're here tonight, you can see with this goals, as we're here under pursuant to Council Priority number 5, which was really pursue Artist Live Work affordable housing opportunities. That was at the annual planning retreat in January of this year. And an opportunity has presented itself. There are some properties, work-live properties that are available on the market under normal circumstances. The Community Land Trust that the council approved earlier this year and in the future would pursue these type of opportunities. However, just given the timing, the land trust isn't in a position, so the city is considering, the city council is considering potentially bridging that time until such that the land trust can acquire the property, and also doing it in a manner that allows the council to consider potentially financially supporting other projects in the future as well. Next slide. Quickly go through the properties. The first one is 2535 Laguna Canyon Road. It's 14 units listed at 4.9 million. You can see the net income there that's generated. The left-hand number, the low end, is what is currently collected based on the offer memorandum. And then if we take market rate rents, that would be the upper end number. Next slide. Here's the second property listed at 4.5, slightly smaller, 11 units. And again, you can see the net income where it currently is, 189. and the upper end 273. Most of this property is hillside, residential hillside, and you can see the buildable portion at the bottom along adjacent Laguna Canyon Road. That's across from the Art College. LCAD, pardon me. Next slide. So the long-term plan that's been discussed, as mentioned, is get these properties into the community land trust, the city's local community land trust. We anticipate the rules and all the tax setup to be done by end of 2025, early 2026. We would want a funding plan in place so that if the land trust were to acquire this property or any other property, these properties or any other properties, it would be in a position to financially afford, it would be feasible from a financial perspective. So the interim plan, the city keeps the property until land trust is ready with its funding plan. One of the things we would love to hear feedback tonight is a backup plan, the contingency if the city does choose to go forward at some point, we don't see the land trust as a viable option. What would the city's contingency be? Be it sell it, after a period of time, so on and so forth. Next slide. Opportunities, benefits of these properties being listed today. We have 5 artist live work units and 20 industrial workspace properties. These have longtime local artists working out of these spaces and would go under the guidelines of preserving the city's culture. They're near turnkey. The city has an opportunity, or the community has an opportunity to protect existing artist spacing. Both these properties show the ability to infill or add more units. So not only what's there today, in the future, we could add on more and develop more affordable housing, work-live space. And anything added would count towards the city's regional housing needs assessment. Next slide. Risks and implications. It's $9.5 million upfront investment by the city. It's going to be the city's responsibility anywhere from 1 to 5 years. Optimistic for the former number, not the latter, but that's the reality of the window. There's ongoing costs, including debt service, operation, and maintenance expenses. There's also upgrade costs. We don't know until we can conduct our due diligence, but at this point, any information on the cost to bring any building code requirements, safety compliance, we're just unaware of. We haven't been able to look yet, so we would need to establish that, and then slope stability behind both properties. Next slide. All those we intend to identify during the due diligence period. We're just not there yet. Well, that's good enough. I think, let's see if I can just, well, no, actually, that's from my perspective. I'll turn it over to Gavin now. That's just kind of an overview. Gavin has some financial models to share with the council to consider and get feedback on how the city could play the part of that bridge entity.
Okay, thanks, Jeremy.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. I'll actually start on the first financial model slide while Jennifer pulls it up. But this one just really goes over the assumptions we kind of used in modeling. And when I talk about modeling, there'll be some scenarios in there, but there's many other scenarios we probably or could look at, but we try to pick 4 just to help with the discussion today. And so in the financial model, as Jeremy mentioned, it's purchases of $9.5 million to $10 million. We kind of went with $10 million, assuming there may be just improvements to the properties. We don't know. We just want to put a placeholder in there. So we're looking at the $9.5 to $10 million and $10 million range in these scenarios. The rental income, anywhere from $349,000 a year to $522,000 a year. So there is some income coming into the properties. And then if you take there's operation and maintenance, $130,000 for both properties. So kind of that income less those operations and maintenance kind of get to your net income. You'll see in the scenarios when I get to them, we looked at some loan term assumptions. So we looked at a 15-year, 4.5% interest rate. The rate for the city just going out, if you did a private placement today, for example, would be in the range of 4 to 5, probably on the lower side of that at 4.2%. So the city wanted to borrow and go out and do a private placement with a bank for 15 years. 4.2 is kind of where that probably would sit. But we took that rate, we took 4.5 just for the workshop today. And you'll see in the scenarios, we looked at just an interest only component to it, which means We'd pay interest only for any of the scenarios with the assumption that when it moved into the community land trust, that principal payment or the refund would come back, or repayment to the city would come back. And then this is just to mention this, whenever you look at a private placement, you'll see in the scenarios, whenever you do a private placement, usually the banks want some assets in place for collateral, and typically it's a police station, a fire station, or some city asset to help with that. And then you'll see in one of the scenarios, it talks about just an overall city contribution, not a borrowing, but just a straight out city contribution of $5 million. And as I go through these, you'll see we just did 4 scenarios, but there are more that could have been done. We just, for time and for discussion today. The next slide, you can go to the next slide. The next slide here is really what available funds does the city have to contribute toward the purchase price. And I think at the end, we can't actually make this work. There is enough funding available to do it. This is just an example of what could be done. And for available amounts, you can see if you look at this chart at the beginning, there is in the housing fund, the housing in lieu. Between the housing fund and the housing lieu, there's about 1.5 million. And when you see repayment requirement, what I mean by that is you don't necessarily have to pay that back. The council doesn't have to do that. They can do that, but it is not required to do that. The next line down, same with the parking fund. And this is the $1 million the council set aside for the matching grant for the housing program. That's there. Does the council need to repay that? No, it does not. So it's listed there as well. There's available fund balance in the parking fund. This council could take anywhere from 2 to 3 million. Again, there's no obligation to pay that back. Down again in the open space fund, there's $1 million in the fund itself. Again, you could use that funding, no obligation to pay it back. But of course, you give up some of these things that are in, you've used these funds for, like for open space, you'd give up purchases of open space down the road to do that. And we get into the next, a couple of funds, vehicle replacement, insurance, wildfire safety. Those are really funds that are sitting in those funds for future purchases. For example, the vehicle replacement's a good example of that, where the city council and the city sets aside money for the future replacement of vehicles. And so sitting in that fund is anywhere from $12 to $13 million in cash. Do you need that today? No, you do need, anywhere from 2 to 3 million a year. So there is money available in that fund. And so we put down 3 to 5 million. The same goes for the insurance fund, where we set aside $4 million or $5 million for compensated absences. That's your employees' vacation, sick leave. Do you need that money today? Meaning, do you need to pay that out today? No, that is paid off over time. So borrowing is a way you can use those resources and then pay them back over time. Same with the wildfire safety. Things we didn't, I always just mention that as an alternative, it's in there as well, but not in the table itself. The council could always consider redirecting funding set aside for capital improvement programs. The general fund reserve sits at 20%. The municipal code obligates us to 10%. So the council could change kind of the policy or past practice to keep it at 20%. And then there is a disaster contingency reserve. And I just mentioned those as, this financial model and these available funds is kind of an example, but there are other resources that we could use. This was just a way for the conversation today. So next slide, please. And I'll apologize to the audience and the council for this. Obviously, it's very hard to read, and hopefully maybe we can zoom in, Jennifer, a little bit. So we looked at just 4 scenarios, and this takes a lot of the givens that I'd given in that previous slide, and it tries to kind of look at what the net cash flow would be, what the city obligations would be. So in scenario 1 is where the city basically pays for the property in cash, but loans itself the money. And in that previous slide, talked about where those funds may come from. And so if you look at that $10 million loan, you look at the income, you'll get anywhere from $349,000 and up to $522,000 if the properties were at market rate for rent, and you have the $130,000 O&M. You would get to a net income number. If you loan the money at a 4.5%, your interest-only payment annually would be about $450,000. So if you take your rent or your income, you reduce your O&M, and you reduce your debt service, your net cash flow is about a negative $231,000 to $58,000, just depending on where the rents are going to be. And so in that same example in scenario 1, the city could basically repay itself on the loan up to what's available. So you would be short 231,000 to 56,000. And the city could then just say, well, upon transfer, we would just, accrue that interest or not collect it. And then the back end, when the property is transferred, try to make that up with the transfer to the community land trust, having them pay both not only the principal, but interest that's still being unpaid. And of course, there's a couple just budget impacts. Obviously, using money, city borrowed money, there is some less available for other city priorities just because it would go to this priority. And again, just to note that there is the city owns the property and debt service is not quite covered by the income. So we'd have to kind of make some adjustments to that. Scenario 2 is very similar in that you'd be borrowing $10 million, but actually this would come through an LLC. So the city then wouldn't be purchasing the property, but the LLC would, and the city would loan the LLC the money. And it kind of goes through the same scenario. You've got the 349, the income levels, you have the annual O&M, and you still have an interest only, if the city did an interest only loan of $450,000 would need to be paid. So that net cash flow then would become the obligation of the LLC. So the LLC would try to have to figure out a way to make that difference up, or the city could choose, for example, to do an interest only, but we won't charge interest for the first few years until things get settled. So there's lots of ways to kind of rework that arrangement. But again, the LLC would take the property, the city would loan the LLC the money, and then the LLC would be responsible to repay the debt to the city. Scenario 3, it's that private placement loan I talked about. So this is where the city would, instead of coming up with the funds itself, would actually ask for a bank to come up with a private placement loan. Again, the only real difference here is in a private placement loan from a bank, they want some type of principal payment made upfront. And so they would ask for example, we need not only the interest to be paid, but at least $20,000 toward the principal payment. So that does change your net cash flow a little bit. It changes it to a 20,000, basically a little more negative than in those previous scenarios. And the only little challenge with that is, of course, you'd have to make these, if there was any delay in transferring into the community land trust, these principal payments, say were $20,000 each year for the first 5 years, they would likely want to see some increases to those in going from years 5 to say 15. So you would have to make some additional contributions at that point. But that's where that PP loan would come. And again, you could do interest only, but there would be some principal payment that would have to be paid. In scenario 4, this is where.
Excuse me, Gavin. Can we kind of slide the screen over so
sorry.
everybody can see the
Yeah, you're
scenarios?
not consistent with what we're seeing here.
So I think you're on scenario 2. Maybe slide over so we see 3 and 4.
And I apologize. I know this is, even for the audience today, a little hard to read. And so just for the benefit of the council and those in the audience, the first 3 scenarios really look at the city paying cash for the property and keeping it, and keeping the property as a city asset until it's transferred. Scenario 2 is the same, it's a little different in that the LLC would purchase the property, but the city would still be loaning the $9.5 million to $10 million to the LLC. Scenario 3 is a little different in that the bank is loaning the city the money. So we're not paying out the $9.5 million, the bank is, and we would have a debt service payment made to the bank to the tune of $470,000, at least in the first few years. So it really, between those first 3 scenarios, the real difference is the cash outflow you would have to come up with. In scenario 1, scenario 2, you're coming up with $9.5 million to $10 million. In scenario 3 with a private placement, the bank's coming up with the money. You're just, you're paying back the debt service to it annually to the tune of about $490,000. In the 4 scenario, if you can squeeze it. Oh, we're going to move forward. So they're working on it. So in the 4 scenario, this just looks at if there was a contribution, just an outright contribution to the purchase of the property with no repayment option. It just looked at what if the city contributed half and then did a loan for the other half. And that's really just to look at what that would do. And kind of what it does is you can see, if you look at, you still have obviously the same income, the same annual O&M, but the debt service obviously is a little less. So you're starting to see a more positive net cash flow. And that just shows you that a contribution to the property purchase obviously just helps with the overall net cash flow to the property. And so those are kind of the 4 scenarios. There are others. These are just the 4 we looked at, but there are many ways to kind of work through this. I think the takeaway is there's funding available to do it, but we could do it a lot of different ways to either you upfront the funding or the funds upfront, all 9.5 million, or alternatively, you can look at a debt service possibility, which actually lowers your annual cash outflow to more of a debt service payment. And then I just mentioned, if they could go back the slide, there's just some general risks, and these are just things that and typically in any financial transaction, there's a cash flow. Obviously, whatever, if the city does pay the 9.5, it just means that funding isn't available for other things. O&M, we have an estimate, but that could change either to the positive or to the negative. So there is some risks there if it goes up. There are market risks, and I've never actually seen too many of this in Laguna, but there are market risks if the property value goes down. That is a possibility. And then, of course, and I put scenario 3, really that balloon payment is if there's any delay in trying to move, if the city does go with a private placement loan and there's some delay in getting into the community land trust, there could be some balloon payments that have to come due, and the city would have to just deal with those at that time. And so those are the financials. I'll turn it back over to Jeremy for the last slide.
This is just a summary of the next steps. For the next month, we'd continue negotiations. We would draft a financial plan as an interim step based on the feedback that we hear tonight. Complete our due diligence, as I indicated at the start of the presentation, which includes a property condition assessment. The goal would be on December 10th, whatever's discussed here tonight, as well as the outcome of the negotiations would be presented if there's an actionable item during the December 10th council meeting. That concludes our presentation. We're available for questions. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Jeremy. Questions, council, for staff?
Well, I have a question, Gavin. You mentioned that under market rate conditions, we'd receive between 349 and 522 a year. Are these market rate conditions applied to the housing as we see it tomorrow and as the work live for moderate and low income? Is that what you meant by market rate?
Well, and I can, but I'll answer that. Maybe if Jeremy needs to chime in, he can. What that is what the income is today is that 349. And if you went to market rent down the road, it would get you to 522. To answer your Councilman Weiss, would you go to the full market rate? I can't answer that, but that would be a decision of the council to do, but probably if it's low income, probably.
So we don't really know what the cash flow will be, but based on how we're going to structure eventually this, if we do purchase it and it becomes low income, moderate income, artist work, live housing, what would that revenue stream be? We don't know.
No, and
Okay.
If I was looking at this in these financial scenarios, I'd always say your worst case scenario in these scenarios is the 231 negative number you'd have to come up with every year.
231, okay.
Right.
Yeah, Councilmember Weiss, we could say is the low end, it would be higher than the low end, but lower than the top end of it would be within the range presented this evening.
So it would still be within that 349 to 522 you're saying, Jeremy?
Correct.
Okay. And that's with everything taken into consideration, low income and moderate. Okay. I didn't see those numbers, so they weren't here. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. No. Okay, let's see, council, we probably need 20 minutes maybe to talk. So let's go. We'll take public comment until 5:25, and then we're going to cut it off and come back to council. So everybody line up. I'll give you 2 minutes.
Good evening, Council. George Dubin with you. I've got a little prepared statement. I think you have copies of it. What is happening here is the most significant action the Council has ever taken in the history of the art colony to ensure that artists of all stripes will be able to remain and thrive in Laguna Beach in perpetuity. Securing the properties at 2535 and 2307 Laguna Canyon Road in the interim until the community land trust is in place will be your lasting legacy to the art community. After all, we are an art colony, not a retirement colony, and as such, being committed to maintaining affordable spaces for our artists to create in is an integral part of not only our history, but essential to the healthy future of this special place we all call home. This is a great opportunity for our community to invest in ourselves and our cultural heritage. By securing these unique properties, we will be assured that the future of what Laguna Beach was founded on will thrive and remain a part of what makes Laguna a world-class center for all the arts. I want to assure the council that all the creatives of 2535 and 2307 are fully committed to helping in any way we can through funding efforts, art auctions that we would donate 100% of the proceeds, and reaching out to our client base when the time comes to fund the community land trust to pay back this bridge loan. We saved the green belt thanks to folks like Tony and others, and the blue belt. This is our grand opportunity to secure the creative belt for now and into the future. So many thanks from all at 2535 and 2307. The community will thank you always for your commitment to the arts and the artists in Laguna Beach. And I want to mention that we've had a very good advisory group that, has been working on this. And they're made up of professionals here in Laguna Beach that have expertise in all kinds of things and are willing to continue to help and be committed to getting the land trust up and functioning, and also contributing to whatever is needed to continue to make these places available and affordable for artists. So thank you very much.
Thank you, George.
Hello, my name is Hetty Boujon Williamson, and I'm a resident of Laguna Woods, but I was born in Laguna Beach, and I've kept a studio at 3251 Laguna Canyon Road for the last 15 years. And I want to speak to the responsibility of the city of Laguna Beach, the relationship with artists in Laguna Beach, and the fiscal contribution that artists have made to Laguna Beach. As early as the 1920s, it was artists who advocated against drilling for oil, as they did in Newport Beach, as they did in Huntington Beach. It was artists who, like the cultural bookstore maven Jim Dilley, like Barbara Stewart, who contributed to the Canyon, Mark Chamberlain, for organizing the community awareness to instigate the protection of our environment. I've been a past president of the Festival of Arts. I'm not president, board member, Festival of Arts and Sawdust Festival, two institutions that have contributed tremendous amounts of money to our community in the form of parking revenue, in the form of bed tax revenue, and in the case of the Festival of Arts, because they underwrote the after two bonds failed to pass to secure the Main Beach Park, the negotiation, the rent was rewritten to secure a minimum amount that would pay for that bond. When that bond was retired, the Festival of Arts continued to put in upwards of over $500,000 a year annually for regular years into this community. And also I served on the Scholarship Foundation. The Festival of Arts Foundation has contributed to the education of numerous Laguna Beach students. So thank you so much for considering this series.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, council members. My name is Jeff Randolph. I'm a 33-year resident of Laguna Beach. My background is finance, commercial finance, and investment management on both a regional and a national, international basis. And we had an expression in finance, it's like, well, how did they go bankrupt? Well, it was slowly, and then all of a sudden. And that's kind of what I think is happening here with the art community, is they've been slowly moving out, we're losing them, and then all of a sudden they'll be gone. So I really am encouraged by this meeting and by this opportunity for us to make a difference here and to really make the investment. I happen to also sit on an organization called The Village, which is associated with the Orange County Community Foundation, We have a building in Santa Ana, two-story building, and we house nonprofits there, and we keep the rent below market because we see that as a social contract we have to our community. And that's what I see here tonight. This is a social contract we have to the art community to underwrite this community for the long haul. For the last 4 or 5 months, I've been involved with the advisory committee, and there's just so much talent and experience on this committee. And they're not only dedicated to making this deal happen, but to make the land trust successful. And that's kind of what we're looking at as your takeout, if you will. That's the money we'd like to bring in and take the city out of its position. There's a high barrier of entry here for affordable housing. And what's happening, there's an opportunity here with 2 assets that are saying, here's a great foundation, here's a great way to start this and kick this off. And there'll be hopefully many more after this. So I would say that there's a social contract here. There's great people surrounding this in the advisory committee, which would move in with the community land trust. We have a unique opportunity to get an asset that you otherwise would not be able to procure or take you years to develop. And there's a commitment to this community land trust that will make it successful, and I think broad reaching within our community. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
I'm delighted that you made this decision to go forward with this property. I think the community is supportive. I'm here to ask you to go in with your eyes wide open and not be surprised. I maintain an 80-year-old property and a 100-year-old property. I'm a landlord, and when somebody calls me, I like to respond. Well, you're going to be a landlord to many, many people in very, very old property. And I suspect historically they have chosen not to complain much to their landlord because they didn't want their rent to go up. So what are you facing? You're facing property that probably has issues with plumbing, with electricity, with roofs. You've got fire issues. You've got all kinds of things. So I'm here to ask you to factor that in. And don't be surprised, because I'm concerned about all of the things that the city is spending money on. This is something I want you to spend money on. But if the landlord is a very nice old man and you don't want to bother him, but if the landlord is the city and you call the city, there's an expectation that something happened. And there's also an expectation of standards. It's one thing to patch something, and it's another thing to bring it up to standard. So you have to ask yourself, what is the standard you're going to maintain with this property? So please do it right.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Jackie Shafkin. Thank you for letting me speak. I am in favor of preserving affordable work-live units and, of course, work units. Similar to the last speaker, though, I would just implore you to get some type of appraisal or detailed analysis. The projected NOI increase on these properties is significant, and that is for commercial spaces. These are not rental units, except for the 5 that are currently apartments. And so, a bank is going to look at the as-is value, or they'll look at the future value and discount it back. I just think in terms of the assumption that rents will be increased tomorrow for all these spaces and it's worth $10 million together is not really, that's not realistic, and that's just not the way properties are appraised. If you cannot get an appraisal in time to accommodate your negotiation timeframe, there's certainly people that can do analyses for you. But overpaying for something like this can have longer term ramifications aside from having cash flow issues that you don't anticipate. But if you transfer this to a community land trust, if it decides it would like to try to create additional affordable housing and maybe convert some of these units to actual work-live units, any partner that's going to finance a project with that community land trust is going to be looking at not what you paid for, but what it's worth. Okay, so it's really important that you don't overpay for the properties, and this is just kind of 101 in how you value income-producing properties. Thank you.
Thanks, Jackie.
Hi, Cody Engel. The earbuds are now hearing aids. I strongly support this, and it's a must-do. But there's 2 questions. The city has committed $2.5 million to match the possible state grant on the community church. And I just want to make sure that what's been included as the resource here is being double dipped. The second issue is that since it's going to be either in the community land trust or by the city, the criteria for occupancy is going to have to be defined. And I assume it's going to be defined something along household income. You may want to begin to formulate that so that the existing folks and the people who are thinking about using this space understand what the criteria might be, because they might be surprised. Thank you.
Thanks, Cody.
Good evening. Mark Christie, lifetime resident, strongly supporting this. Laguna is an art colony. I've been here forever. When I was on the high school teams, we were the artists. That is our identity. And yeah, it's a big number and there's a negative cash flow, but there is at least that contingency plan on the back end of reselling it. We know there's a lot of activity on these properties due to sheer supply and demand. The supply is very finite. Let's just get this done. I think, it's a big number. I get it. But, on things like this, I bought a lot of different properties in town and I probably overpaid for a couple at the time. But at the time I asked myself, what's the cost of not doing it? And the cost of not doing this would be continued attrition of the artists, the very soul of Laguna. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark.
Good evening, Billy Freed here, and I want to echo Mark's sentiments. This is just remarkable that you guys have the will to do this. I just randomly was speaking to somebody in San Diego the other day, and I told them what you guys were doing, and they just could not believe that a city council would subsidize artists to keep them here. He said, I don't know of any other city that would ever consider doing such a thing, and it just shows what a strong-willed council you are, how you support the arts, recognize it's our primary industry here, and without them, we'd be an empty shell. So please go forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Billy.
Good evening, Council. Paulette Adams, longtime resident. I want to say thank you so much for considering spending millions of dollars to help our local artists here in town. And a thank you to the person who put together all the numbers for the buildings that even a layperson could understand. I also wanted to inform the public and those who are involved but may not be aware of it, the fact that out of 25 total units, only 5 are one-bedroom apartments, and only 1 of the apartments is being used by an artist, that being our accomplished planning commissioner, George Dubin. I don't see 10 million for one artist being a great idea, but we have affordable art lofts, affordable housing, live space already in the canyon, and it still has vacancies, including a 2-bedroom unit if anybody needs one. The artists also need and don't have enough of work sell space. Unlike the art lofts, which is work live, that has vacancies, the artist studios in the canyon has an ongoing wait list. 26 units. Hetty Buzan has a space there at 3251 Canyon Road. So the solution to our challenge is to benefit the artists currently renting space, is to invest in artist work sell space, because that, I believe, would help them stay in town more than leaving, and selling only for 2 months out of the year is not letting them make enough money to stay in town. Artists' ateliers where they can work and let customers watch the magic, meaning educational, happen and display their creations for sales makes much more sense to me and gives them much more exposure to be discovered. We have a plethora of artist studios throughout the canyon, and the artists still struggle financially. There is a building on Forest Avenue that could be fabulous. There's one artist space there, a lot of miscellaneous units that aren't being used. It could be a haven of creativity and give new life to the whole block and the restaurants, in my opinion. Please consider that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have, Penny's going to be our last speaker.
Hi, Mary Locatelli, Usually you can't hear me. I think this is a very commendable idea that you have to support the artists in Laguna. I mean, who as a resident of Laguna would not agree with that? I just want you to go into it, as someone else said, with your eyes wide open financially. What you're really taking on here is a role as not only a property developer, because this property is going to have to be changed dramatically to get to its intended use, and then a property manager. And those are not skill sets that are usually core competencies of cities. So, you know, quite honestly, we don't have real good luck with purchases of properties. In the past, we had Tiamo that, you know, we bought with the idea that it would be a fire station. Now we found out it's not going to be able to be a fire station, so we have to sell it. We have St. Catharines that we bought 2 years ago with the idea that it would provide recreation to the community. Great idea, both of them, great ideas. But St. Catharines 2 years later is grossly underutilized because we just can't manage to get that done. So again, there's nothing wrong with what you want to do. Just ask yourselves how you're doing it and whether we have the core competency to do that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mary.
Randy Bader. So far in this town, myself and Terry Thornsley are the only two artists that ever built an artist live work. No one else has pulled it off. And I can tell you it's really difficult. Back then, we built the entire building for $350,000, including purchasing the land. Can't do that anymore. These properties are ready-made for artists to work in. They're unique tenants. They don't ask much. Just leave me alone. If it breaks, I'll fix it. So the city is not going to be involved in a constant war between I need this and I need that. As far as the safety of the properties, all those properties survived after the fire when the hillsides were denuded. They didn't have any landslides to speak of. Also, then you show the high and the low of the rents. Going to the high rent, you're talking about 50% increase in rent for people who are already having a hard time surviving. So this should be something that the city sees as a benefit to the city and almost as a gift. And without artists, is an art colony just a bunch of galleries? Without artists who work in the city, we're not an art colony anymore. That's it.
Penelope Milne, president of CANDO, the Canyon Alliance of Neighborhoods Defense Organization. And I just want to say three things that are not necessarily very connected. Unless you work further through this process, I may have some other things to say. So the first one is that we have always advocated for helping those who were artists or others, but especially artists who already had artist live work that might not be legal, helping to support them and bring them out of the shadows. So we're certainly big supporters of the sort of general effort. Again, there may be some details that are still to be worked out and some challenges there. But I would also say, and you guys probably know this, our Cultural Arts Department has done a great job with pursuing surveys of what artists actually want. And for sure, if you look at that, the support with studio space, because for people who already had living space was a big thing. So I'm not saying that instead of this, but I am saying if you haven't sort of that might be something to consider as you think about that mix, right? How much work live versus how much studio space do artists actually want? And again, I get that there's an advocacy group who, in fact, a lot of them are artists, so that may be updating the surveys that the Cultural Art Department did. But that was very interesting to read because it was not a majority of work live that they were requesting. So second thing, unrelated. The property 2307, the bit that's actually building is M1A. The hillside is RHP. It directly abuts open space conservation to the north and open space passive to the east. The open space runs directly from there the whole way back through the Elisa Woods Canyon Wilderness Park. I'd like the city to consider that if they become owners to that, they, or even if they don't, that the RHP, which is steep but essentially unbuildable, be rezoned open space. If the city does that, that would protect that, even if it was eventually purchased by another owner. So thank you.
Okay, Roger, we're going to close it up now.
I'll be brief.
Well, okay, you got 30 seconds. We got to get to our
One
business.
thing to add maybe that is that in bits and pieces, what we can do here to support our historic uniqueness as an art colony and to bring in young artists too, to freshen up the festivals too, is that this can also contribute to our affordability requirement mandated by the state. And I assume in bits and pieces, we're going to get there. I'd like to ask, when are we due to come up with this affordability? And this can be a contributing start to that.
Okay, thanks, Roger. I'll close the public hearing.
Madam Mayor, would it be okay to just comment briefly? A couple of speakers talked about what our due diligence will be. We'll be doing a phase 1 environmental site assessment. And Jeremy windowed this a little bit, but we can get into more detail. If a phase 2 is required, we'll follow up on that. We'll be doing a property condition assessment, a PCA. We'll be doing an appraisal as noted. That's due to come back the first part of December. We'll be doing a geotech analysis. And then one commenter talked about property management. This is something we would likely contract out if we don't have the in-house staff to do that. And there are many property managers that do a great job for municipalities. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Dave. That's helpful. Okay, who would like to start? Anybody?
That's until the trust takes it over.
That's right. The first section was due diligence. The property management would be until the trust took it over.
Right.
As long as we had any kind of title to it.
And right now, we think that that's between 6 to 9 months before the trust is set up.
Yes.
The property assessment, Dave, does that include what's needed to bring it up to code?
Typically would identify those things. Yeah, it wouldn't identify costs,
And
but
the
it
cost.
include items.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Go ahead, Bob.
I was just going to say it might be helpful to pull up the recommendations from the staff report, because I think it's,
Yeah, the matrix.
well, yeah. I mean, but I think what you're looking for direction on. I mean, here's my take. Number one, I think it says, direct staff to proceed ahead with negotiations. I think we absolutely need to do that. We're in the midst of negotiations, so we ought to direct staff to do that. For all the reasons that people out there described tonight, this is an opportunity we shouldn't let go by, and we need to really do our best. So continue negotiations. I think draft financial plan makes sense, and it'll be brought back to us on December 10. I think my preference would be not to have the city directly own the property, but rather to have an entity own it. I think there's multiple reasons for that, one of which is kind of technical, the Surplus Land Act, that we can transfer it to Community Land Trust, subject to some limitations. I don't think we need to go down that route. If we make the loan to the limited liability company or another entity that staff's able to identify, we should do that. And then in terms of whether, I think we should have staff come back with a recommendation. I think we should be looking at two options when you come back. One would be the all cash option, and one would be the borrowing option. And I think when you look at the borrowing option, because I think there are some revenues we can think about putting to this. First of all, I think whoever made the point, we're not going to that high end of the net operating income. That would be a 46% increase. It defeats the whole purpose, right? You take this to market and you're defeating the purpose of why you're buying it. So there is going to be a shortfall. There is going to be a need for some cash contributions. So I think what I'd like to see modeled is, the cash is the easier analysis, but the loan where we're making a loan at an assumed interest rate of what the city could borrow at, and then what does that cash flow look like, and identify how we cover the negative cash flow, probably for like a period of 3 years. And what occurs to me is we do already have an identified revenue stream that we contribute into the housing fund each year from the short-term lodging, right, George? Thank you. So that's something to look at. But I think we should definitely continue the negotiations, and then you should come back to us with a financing structure that shows an entity other than the city acquiring title to this, and then obviously all the due diligence stuff that would come back to us as well. But I think my last comment, and I'll turn it over to others, is You know, I'd like to thank staff. I mean, Dave, our city attorney, Jeremy, Gavin, Jennifer, everybody's jumped on this. We put a lot of resources to getting this far in a fairly short period of time, given the, you know, this wasn't the game plan, right? This just sort of went on the market and we had to react. So kudos to staff for moving it along so far.
I agree with a lot of what you've said, Bob. What I would like to say is that all affordable housing takes two parties, I believe, the city and a private entity. The city cannot solve the housing problem on its own. And therefore, the Housing Trust is the vehicle which Alex and others have created to do this. And I think it's a great entity to take on this project eventually, whether we borrow against it, whether we give them half of that value, which I think is probably what needs to be done. But it also allows the community then to support that land trust to make this happen so that we're not subsidizing it as a city entirely. I don't think that should be our obligation. What I am concerned about also is all of the unknowns so far. There's 5 units that are lived in, or we just said we're not people who are artists at all. So that has to be a hurdle we solve. And then there's an opportunity to build more housing there, whether it's housing work live, which is what it should be. That additional cost will be borne either by the land trust or other entities along with the city. So there's a lot of moving parts to this. I do support housing. I think it's a great project to invest in, but we really ought to have the financials very clear for the public, and knowing that it's not a big loss to the city to do this, and that's going to come from the public itself to support the land trust. Thank you.
Go ahead, Alex.
So yeah, I think I agree with Mike, the two colleagues who spoke before me. That, I mean, first of all, a lot of people articulated it, but you can't overstate the impact of how critical our artistic identity is to what this town's all about. And so it's always easy to find reasons not to do something. It's harder to actually, make it move forward and take action to solve the problem, which is what this could potentially do. I really think that you could come up with like a multiple page list of all the reasons why the city should not be involved at all in owning or managing this property. Bob touched on the Surplus Land Act. I think there's issues as it relates to how we would go about, as Cody Engel talked about, how we'd go about defining occupancy and just there's just so many complicated factors that I don't want the city involved with. I would be in favor of in the due diligence period. Part of that is, one, I'd like to see the community come forward and raise. There's a lot of generous members of our community. We have, corporate partners. We have Providence, the hospital. We have hotels. I'd like to see some money come forward from the community. And there already are the experts that have been, some of them spoke during public comment about putting together some sort of a plan where as Bob said, another entity took it over instead of the city. I don't think it's that complicated to find. There's, regional nonprofits, regional land trusts that could potentially be involved to take it over in the meantime before and during that period before it would go to ultimately our local community land trust. I really see this as the city, not as a property manager, but really as a facilitator in leveraging funds that we're not going to be using in the short term. So really our loss is very insignificant, but our gain is very significant because we're positioning the city to be able to, do something, not just study or talk about as we do as we've done in the past on issues like this, but actually take action. So to me, it's sort of a no-brainer that that there's an opportunity here for the city to act as a facilitator with offering short-term funds that are not currently programmed in the near term, and then finding some sort of a nonprofit or some sort of an entity that could assume ownership and then ultimately property management. But really, I think the community, for this to work, this will only happen if the community, from in terms of their expertise, but also just their financial resources, willing to step up and make this happen. But I think the city as a facilitator here makes a lot of sense, and I'm supportive of the action. I support the two recommended actions laid out by Councilmember Whalen. So.
Well, I think everything's been said by my other council members. Alex, I would support, including looking into other entities that could hold the property other than the city, so we don't have to deal with the Surplus Land Act. So in my view, if that was the worst case scenario and we didn't have any other option, I'd still be willing to go down that road. As far as I like the financing options that Bob laid out, as far as some of the loan and the ability to for the property to pay it, and then the city would have to come figure out a plan how we would make up that difference between what the property generates and what the whatever interest we set, whatever we determine our borrowing interest is at. So, but I do think that there are some other funding mechanisms that we can identify by the time the staff is done with their due diligence. And I think that the staff's, as Dave pointed out a bit ago, the staff is going to answer most of the questions that came up through public comments in regards to any potential concerns on the property as far as its condition and limitations. And there's no doubt once the land trust is set up, and I want to thank all the advisors that have participated, by the way. There's been tremendous amount of support and a lot of talent of people weighing in and discussing various options and how to deal with the property going forward, and I really appreciate that. But I do think that there's no doubt that the land trust folks and whoever ultimately is a part of that is, they're going to have their work cut out for them. And there's no perfect property, especially in the canyon, that's going to accommodate this right off the bat. And most of this stuff has some hair on it, and is going to take a little bit of work and a little bit of creativity to figure out how to make it work. And what I mean by that is, somebody mentioned the combination of workspace only and work-live space. I think that all of those formulas can be worked out as the land trust takes possession of it and starts to work out those details. So I'm confident, and I support the staff moving forward.
Okay, thank you. I just have a question for Jeremy. You said that setting up the land trust is somewhat of a lengthy process. What are all the mechanics involved in setting it up?
Just at a high level, we're going to start off with a financial analysis. Then we'll work into bylaw. Financial analysis is understanding feasibility, what it takes to be feasible from a land trust perspective. It will include and contemplate this action and these properties as well. Then we go into bylaws. And then we have all basically our taxing and filing our nonprofit tax exempt status, 6 to 9 months. It's going to be with the presidential transition. We're not quite sure. We're hearing that might add a couple of months on, but ballparking, 6 to 9 month process.
And we've had a couple of meetings with those consultants. And remind me of the date that they're going to actually be in town.
Jennifer?
Oh, does it matter?
We have not established a date just yet, but around February 2025.
I have a question about the short-term lodging. For the benefit of council and the public, what is that revenue stream today, Gavin, from short-term lodging that council has previously approved?
About 80,000 a year.
How much?
80,000.
80,000.
Annually, and it should obviously increase, but 80,000 for 24, 25.
What's the potential for it to increase over time? What is the number?
I'm sorry, Councilman Weiss, I don't have a projection for that.
Thank you.
We do, though, Councilmember Weiss, we do need to look at illegal short-term rentals, collect those, stop those. So I think we're going to try to attack that as a part of in 2025 to make sure we're on the right place, we're on the right page and all that.
There's probably some good money sitting out there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Collect on short-term lodging for housing is a different category, so it's.
I know, I was talking overall, which would lead it into that, though.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm just going to finish my comments here. One thing, I want to thank Mark and Bob for working on this. I know you spent quite a bit of time on this as well. So the staff and everybody who contributed has been really good. So I agree with you, Bob. I don't have any further comments. I agree with what was said. So you want to make a motion?
Can you pull
There's
that
any
up
further
again,
comment?
Jennifer or Jeremy? It's basically to direct staff to continue negotiations for the acquisition of the
And if I
property.
can, I mean, yeah, we're not seeking a motion tonight. It's just a workshop.
okay.
But if I can reiterate the direction I believe I heard, Gavin or anyone else, please feel free to step in. So you want staff to look at two options. First is looking at an all-cash option. The second is borrowing, where we're making a loan at an assumed interest rate, and how we can cover for a period of time that structure, as well as any gaps, how we would come up with additional funding to close any gaps between market and the rate we land on, include all due diligence if we return, and then in the meantime, continue to look for a nonprofit entity for assignment if we proceed with acquisition.
Megan, does that sound okay to you?
Yes, I think so. I think that nonprofit or an LLC. I think
Yeah.
it's
Correct.
not
Pardon me,
a
yeah,
nonprofit.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I'd just like to remind everybody that, what was it last workshop that we identified artist housing as a priority?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes, January.
So last January, council did find that artist housing was a priority, and we have been working on the land trust for quite some time. Council did approve Alex and myself to originally start to look for solutions and ideas around coming up with solutions for artist housing. So my point to this is it's not just a whim. This is something, it's been talked about within the community for decades, right? And then the council started taking it seriously at first of the year, and now here we are today, and there's an opportunity. So I just wanted to remind folks of the kind of some of the history, how we got here.
Okay, so you're good, Megan? Okay. We are going to, here's what we're going to be up to. So we're going to recess into closed session. We have another closed session. And that is on the Tiamo property. Dave Kipp is the negotiator, and the negotiating party is Donna Baldwin and Stephen Muller. Price and terms of payment. And then following closed session, we'll give a report out, but we can't use the council chambers because planning commission is going to be here. So I think we're going to go out on the right out here and give our readout if anyone's still sticking around and is interested. And otherwise, we're
Need
adjourned
public
until
comment
December
on-
9th. Yeah.
Is there anyone from the public to speak on the closed session item of Tiamo? Anyone? It appears not.
Really appreciate everybody's patience with